All right, guys, up to now, controlling our player, we've done a lot of stuff in the main game screen. We have our camera that's basically allowing us to see, and we have our Box 2D renderer, which is allowing us to visualize the mechanics of our physical bodies moving. And we've basically set up everything in the main game screen. So the main game screen is still going to be doing a lot of stuff, but we're going to start moving things to prepare for Ashley. So Get Kraken, if I check out my master instead of the Box 2D, I now have where I've commented out a lot of stuff that I will eventually delete, but I can use it for reference. So what I want us to do right now is we're going to actually look at viewports. So we have a camera. A camera does not really allow us to resize right now without skewing the images and things like that. So if you just looked up libgdx and you looked at viewports, there are already managers for camera and stages to deal with, since we're using touchscreen, to deal with all the different movements, because you have to get the screen position when you're actually touching the screen and transfer it to your world for your game, and back and forth when you want to do something. So instead of doing that really manually, what we want to look at is using a viewport. A viewport is really just going to control the scaling of the camera's viewport height and width. We need to kind of back out of thinking of them in terms of pixels, okay? We're going to want to think about it in terms of just the size that we're looking at for our world size. If we use it in terms of our world size, then everything that we create would be in the right proportion that we want it to. So yes, you could do it like this where you're doing pixels, but then you're going to have to deal with a lot of conversions, and we want to actually write it a little bit different. So viewport's not hard to set up. It does allow us to resize. So if they are turning the screen from portrait to landscape, we can deal with that. If they are on a different screen than what we originally designed the game, we can help deal with that too. So when we're looking, there are multiple different types of viewports that we can use. A stretch viewport is where you can have a specific width or height, and the other one will stretch so that you don't have black bars on your screen. A fit viewport is where you can keep your scale, your ratio between your height and your width, the same. So if it's not able to fit on the screen, it will throw black bars on it to maintain the integrity of your screen size. A fill viewport will keep the same aspect ratio, but it will fill the whole screen and just cut off pieces of the screen to make sure that it fills the screen. Screen viewport is a 1-to-1. This is truly in terms of pixels, but then you are basically designing for just one screen and not for multiple screen dimensions for playing your game. Extend viewport will basically do it without black bars, and will extend or lengthen the shorter side, and you can set where it's a max. So here, like the height, or excuse me, the width is actually stretching until you get to a certain ratio. Custom viewport, you could extend the viewport class and you could create something more specific. With the viewports, you could create multiple screens and have maybe like a HUD screen or an action screen. I have went down that route. It is pretty difficult to code and have it working correctly with everything scaled. I find that it's actually easier if you design your space in your game, the playable area, with the HUD in mind. Okay, so let's start implementing that We know that we're going to have a orthographic camera because we're not doing any type of perspective. We're also going to end up having a viewport, and I would use for my game a fit viewport. So we can just call it viewport and we can assign it. Let's just call it game viewport. Okay. And then when we're initializing, then we can establish it. So let's go with, we set up our camera. So camera equals new orthographic camera. And because we are using the viewport to resize, we don't actually have to put dimensions in and do the other parts that we did before. So let's do our game viewport, and our game viewport, we are going to say it's a new fit viewport. And in this, then it's going to take some parameters. So for the fit viewport, we need a width and a height, and then we have to pass it the camera. So we could do, say I want a width of 7 units of what I'm doing in my game by 11 units in height, and then I can pass in my camera. What did I do? Oh, did I not? I didn't import it. Okay. All right. So now that we have that, our viewport now allows us to resize like what we talked about. So we are still going to have to set up for our resize. So now we can go down to where we resize. And here all we had was that it's just resizing, but we can actually put in data for it now. So we could plug in something to be able to resize. And in this case, it's going to be game viewport dot. And we can look at the different methods that we have. Apply, if you actually look at it, it's automatic when you update. So, and I can go through and actually read all of these pieces and look at the original code. So we want to actually update, which is going to require taking a screen width and a screen height. So this is where it's looking at the actual pixels of the screen in the resize method, and then I can pass that in and have it scale so that I have 16 width by 11. It's going to maintain that aspect. So I am passing in the width and the height of the actual screen to my viewport, which is going to maintain for my game. Okay. The other piece that we would need is you would still have to update your camera when you're rendering. So after you do any mechanics of movement, you're going to want to update your camera. So it would be the same thing as here. We're moving our player. We need to update our camera, and the viewport is really just used to help manage the changes on the scaling. Okay, so we're still going to want to update our camera. Now, eventually we are going to want to update this camera after we set up for changes in our having a custom class for the camera. What is my error? That. Okay. So now we have a viewport that is designed for resizing our screen. we should start actually pulling some things out. So we know that we're going to have components. We know that we're going to have systems. I'm going to go ahead and create a couple more pieces, and then we're going to start pulling some of the stuff out from our main game to what we need it to be. So instead of us looking for keys, we need to have methods set up, so some classes to help manage when we're doing touchscreen to be able to capture those type of inputs, and then we can deal with them. So we could still use keys, but we could use so much more instead of just having as a method. The other pieces that we would want to set up, creating the body, that should be done automatically by creating a class. And we are still going to want to set up our world. You could pull that out with Ashley. It kind of depends on how you're doing your design. So that will be in the next video.